because they were managing Anthrax, they got the call right away that there was a bus accident, Cliff died, and they told me, and I just, everything stopped. It was just like, where do you go from here? You're just stopped. And I remember the very first person that I did call was Dave Mustaine, because, they were in a band together. And even though I know it was a hard, devastating breakup for Dave mostly, I just felt like he needs to be shown the respect, to be told to not like read about it in like a newspaper, or like, having someone maybe not close to him who cares about him to tell him. So I remember calling him and telling him that.
The David Ellefson Show. Featuring Grammy Award winner David Ellefson and respected metal journalist Joshua Toomey. Presented by EllisonEmporium.com. Here's David and Joshua.
All right. Welcome to the David Ellefson Show. I'm David. This is Joshua Toomey. And we got a super cool guest today. This is actually Josh's idea because he deals with her a lot. Metal Maria Ferrero is her name, and she's got a very successful rock and roll heavy metal publicity firm called Adrenaline PR. So, Josh, you work with her a lot, I guess, for all your podcasts that you've done over the years, right?
Yeah, honestly, her and maybe a couple of other people like stepped up early. And next, funny, in the interview we talk about that towards the end, about kind of giving the little guys a shot. But yeah, dealing with her over the years, met some super awesome interviews with Lamb of God, Johnny Z before he passed away. I think Michael Alago, I would have met him through her. And just over the years, so many great bands. Dealing with her team over at Adrenaline PR. Annie is great over there. We speak about Natalie, who went on to, she's now with Napalm Records.
Yeah, she did all the press for the Dieth record, Natalie. Yeah. So, a couple years ago, she was my publicist over there. So,
she's great. And Maria, obviously started with Johnny Z and Marcia over at Megaforce, even before it was Megaforce, at the record store and the flea market, Rock and Roll Heaven, dealing with early Metallica and all that stuff. So, this was definitely a fun one.
This was cool, man. Yeah. And she filled in some gaps and she's funny and she's punchy and she pulls no punches, man. And so she corrected my timeline of some memory of some stuff that I didn't quite remember fully either. So this is back. She's an OG, man, for sure. So this is back to the beginning of the origin story, the split with Dave from Metallica. I mean, we are really at the epicenter of where it all happened. So
and when we talk about Cliff's death, like that might be the rawest emotion we've had on the podcast so far.
Yeah. And a real moment. I remember it very clearly when she called. Dave answered the phone, and it was just quiet in the apartment in Silver Lake when that call came in. And then that led to Dave picked up his guitar, wrote the music for "In My Darkest Hour," and then the lyric came together shortly thereafter that he and I put together. And so that was we were basically, I think, home or not, I guess not quite home. No, we were, that's right. We were still going out on the Peace Cells tour. Cause I remember seeing Lars, it's interesting. Peace Cells maybe had just come out actually, now that I think about it. Cause then we went up to, we started it was supposed to be a 5-date run with Motorhead. We started up at Kaiser Auditorium in Oakland. And I remember Lars came down. He was very beat up, obviously just exhausted, and you're like, oh my gosh, so he was there, and I think him and Stefan Shirazi came down, who's a journalist, and so they came down to the show. We did one more show at the Santa Monica Civic Center, and then I remember our managers pulled us off the tour because Pete Gill, the drummer for Motorhead at that time, he'd come from Saxon. And this was the Orgasmatron tour for them. And he had some train tracks that went out basically out to Lemmy's mic stand. And,
Okay.
Lemmy doesn't move. He just kind of stands there and plays, right? So some train tracks behind him don't matter. But the train tracks are basically for his drum riser to come out for the drum solo at one point of the show, go back, that's it. And we're like, we can't set our drum riser up in front as the support act. We never have to set him up onto the side. We tried to negotiate that. Our managers got in a fit, pulled us off the tour. And, so we didn't end up playing like the last 3 shows, which is, kind of a fucked way to start the tour. But you're finally years later, we got to make the concession to Motorhead. We played Grass Pop 2001 when Petrelli was in the band, probably World Needs a Hero. And the promoter came to us and said, look, Motorhead's bus broke down. If can you please swap? We were actually a slot above them. We were like direct support there before us. And they said, listen, if you can, if Motorhead doesn't play, I can't pay them. Obviously they need the money, they're on tour. So we swapped. We played before Motorhead. We did that. And then we came off stage right as they showed up, and they were very gracious. They were very kind. I remember hugging Mickey D and, Lem and Phil. Everybody was very cool. And then after that, never a problem. That kind of scrubbed off that little thing from the Peace Sells tour, 20 years before. So anyway, all is well, and all is well that ends well. So anyway, I digress. But never a loss of stories, it seems, with you bring up one name and there's tethers out to 3 other places. So
absolutely.
Well, yeah, let's get down to it. This is a great interview with Maria. Funny. And it's great history here. So let's do it. This is Metal Maria. So, hey, everybody, David and Josh here. And just want to let you know about Rockabilia, our new partners here on the show. And you can visit them and enter David10 for 10% off on any of your purchases. So some cool stuff they have there, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome company. I mean, if you're of my generation of the, we go to the magazine aisle, and, when it was a print magazine, and, Rockabilia was in every Metal Edge and Metal Maniacs and whatever else, and you would circle every Megadeth t-shirt you wanted, or Metallica or Slayer or whatnot. So super pumped to have Rockabilia on with the David Ellefson show. And, just a few things. They've got over 500,000 items over at rockabilia.com, including staples like the Master of Puppets shirts, Rest in Peace shirts. They do limited edition exclusive drops each month. And the one thing that they wanted to stress was everything is 100% authentic. No bootlegs over there at rockabilia.com. So that's obviously a plus there too.
Cool. So the money goes where it's supposed to go. So, all right. Excellent. All right. So check it out. Rockabilia, David 10 for 10% off. Check it out. Rockabilia.com. Perfect. We're recording. Welcome to the David Ellefson Show. Joshua Toomey, my co-host here.
Hello, Maria.
And today, this whole show is about conversations. That's all it is. We have conversations with musicians. We have conversations with road people, technicians, industry people, just friends of ours from over the years. So today, Maria Ferrero from Adrenaline PR, but she will forever be known to us as Metal Maria. And so as Josh and I were talking a few weeks ago, and he said, we should have Metal Maria on, because we were talking about the Old Bridge Militia. We were talking about that. And I just done, I don't even know if I'm supposed to talk about it, but I'm wearing the shirt, the Jersey Metal documentary that's coming out, and with Mike Schnapp and the whole gang. And so Maria, your name was literally just this last month, just right on the tip of all of our tongues. And that's when I texted you. I said, hey, you want to come on the show? And you graciously agreed. So anyway, welcome to the show.
Ears were ringing. Heavy metal. My ears were ringing. I knew you were.
So behind the scenes, you don't play guitar. You're not a singer on stage, but you are, like so many people in our business, we make it rock and you make it roll. And so anyway, your PR company's been hugely successful over the years. And I just,
Hold on.
yeah.
I'm gonna interrupt. Sorry.
All right, come on.
You just said something, and it really just rang a big bell for me. Behind the scenes. Somebody, Brian Liu. You know Brian Liu,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Murder in the front row.
He posted yesterday a flyer from the Exodus Megadeth show at the Kabuki.
Mm-hmm.
Posted the flyer of, I'm going to fucking punch you so hard with this memory burn, David Ellefson. Sisters of Mercy at the Kabuki.
Dude, I stayed the next night. They played there, right? It was the next night.
Who did?
Wait, were you there?
Oh, are you kidding me?
You and me
Dawn
both? Okay.
Crosby. Dawn Crosby. Your
From
girlfriend.
Détente. From Détente.
She implored that we all. I took photos again. I was telling you, my instant camera. I have photos of the Sisters of Mercy from that night. I have photos of all of us backstage. Bobby Gustafson was there. Mm-hmm. Kirk Hammett. I have a picture of Kirk. Mark Osegueda. I think it was Mark. Kirk, Gary. No. It was Kirk. Kirk, Gary, me, and Bobby Gustafson from that show. And yeah, we did go to the Sisters of Mercy. So, and also another behind the scenes photo just recently popped up aside from those concert flyers from Brian Liu. Talking to Michael Schnapp, he mentioned Lips. We were talking about that earlier. Yeah. I have a photograph when John and Marcia promoted the Anvil shows at the, Rock and Roll Heaven, the flea market.
Right.
Started. John and Marcia had Anvil come from Canada to perform at the flea market. It all started there. And then they came to play at L'Amour. And I recently found a photograph backstage. I was young. I think I was 15, possibly 16 at the time. Most likely 16. And I'm standing there wearing this Angel Witch vest.
Nice.
This vest. I'm wearing that. Yeah. And there with his Flying V guitar. So Adrenaline PR is cool as fuck, right? I worked Lamb of God for 22 years, putting them on the map. They'll tell you, late night TV to, Billboard to Rolling Stone on down, all of it, Guitar World covers, Revolver covers. That's all well and good. But what we have done in building this community as, like, I'm going to say it, the pioneers, the forefathers, the foremothers, I'll give myself a little bit of, credit there by being behind the scenes. I was a very young girl from Old Bridge, New Jersey, suburban, 45-minute bus ride into New York City. There wasn't much going on, but we had Megaforce and Rock and Roll Heaven and John and Marcia, and they really put it all on the map. None of us would be here if it wasn't for them, because they got right behind Metallica. Yes, Brian Slagle put it out on a compilation album, but he didn't risk everything. Mm-hmm. And I love Brian, and he still does it and risks it still. But back then, the history is what the history is. John and risked everything, their family, their livelihood, everything to bring Metallica to the East Coast. And had they not done that, and Metallica,
none of us would be here. Yeah, exactly. Hey, so listen, I want to start there. So thank you for the reference,
man. Let's
start there, because so you and I met summer of 1983. I'm going to call. So Greg Handovit and I.
You want to start before we met?
Hold on.
Go ahead.
I just want to give a context of where you and I started, and Josh, maybe you even knew her before. I don't know how, because you're younger than us. But still, okay. So I moved Minnesota to Hollywood. I moved into the apartment, 1736 North Sycamore, underneath this guy, Dave Mustaine, who we don't know, who's from a band called Metallica, who we don't know. Yeah. And meet him, a few days later over some beer, cigarettes, and learn the whole story. He was in Metallica. They parted ways in April, just about 6 weeks prior to that, right? Now, you fly out to Hollywood. Now, first question, did you come out with Bobby Gustafson at that time or not? That was, you were on your own. Okay, got it.
Okay, so I graduated high school in 1983. Mm-hmm. My best friend graduated a year before me. She met this weird guy at a Judas Priest show at the Palladium in New York, moved to Hollywood. They just left. She went to the US Festival, and she was like, yeah, it's so heavy metal out in Hollywood. This was 1983, right?
Yeah.
You have to come out here. So I asked my dad, get me a one-way ticket to Hollywood as my graduation present.
Nice. Okay. So you're there. Now, here's what I want to ask you. Okay, so just literally maybe 2 months before I met you, let's call this, just say this was June 83, right? So probably the month I moved there, June or July, right? So you're there, me, Dave, Greg Handovit, you're there to see your friend Dave, who you had just met in April, right? When he had played, let's fill in the blanks here. Okay. So you saw Metallica with Dave at L'Amour. Didn't you see them? I thought you saw Dave with Metallica.
The story is John and Marcia brought Metallica to the East Coast. I worked at Rock and Roll Heaven.
Yeah.
At Megaforce, before it was even Megaforce Records, like I hung out at the house every day, answering the phones, making lunch. I was a neighborhood kid that was a metal fan, and they were into metal. Like I bought a Motorhead record from Johnny and Marcia, from Rock Heaven, from his garage. They sold Judas Priest records. So like, there was this little metal community thing going on in Old Bridge they had the record store. They were older. They were 27, 28. We were teenagers. We were kids. And, then they started the record company. But what happened was Metallica came to the East Coast. They started playing. John and Marcia funded the tour, funded the record. They toured with Raven. It was the Kill 'Em All for One tour. It was their first tour, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
That was months. That was a few months later, right? Yeah, right.
So what happened was with Mustaine, because that's really how.
Yeah, let's get to that story because that's kind of the downbeat of where we connected.
We would party, Rockin' Ray and Metal Joe's house. Air guitar, that kind of shit all weekend. Some of the guys did speed. Dave Mustaine drank too much. He was a mess. He was a very sloppy alcoholic drunk, and it was embarrassing. And I think Metallica was just done. And all respect, I love Dave. He's like my brother, but that's how it was, man. That's what we saw. And it was really like combustive, like something's gonna not work. They had to get rid of him. So they fired him, put him on a bus. He went back to wherever he went, home, whatever that meant. We didn't know. I stayed in New Jersey. It's where I lived. And Metallica continued. And then I graduated high school. And then I left Megaforce and Johnny and Marcia. Again, I don't think the label started yet. It was just Rock and Roll Heaven and helping them at booking shows. They were promoting shows, bringing Metallica, Venom, Anvil, Exciter, all kinds of bands. So they were building that reputation as like a trusted commodity in the heavy metal community in America, where it really only existed in the NWO BHM, the new wave of British heavy metal. And I think those bands like Judas Priest, AC/DC, and Def Leppard and such, they gave Metallica that like bar up here to kind of rise up to in sound, because they were like dirty punk rock kids from fucking LA Bay Area, aren't sophisticated. They were kind of dirty and shit. So, and did drugs and drank. Sorry. Anyway, so
we all did.
And Mustaine went west. You guys hooked up. I don't really know that story. Now I move out there because like I graduated high school. I need to be in the land of heavy metal. I am back. Yeah, which, by the way, James Hetfield named me. So nice. It was in August. It was my birthday, and they were playing a show at Lemoore East, not Lemoore, Brooklyn, Lemoore in Queens. And I'm front row, like obnoxious kid. It's my birthday, James! Like screaming at the front from the front row. So he dedicated Metal Militia to me and said Metal Maria. So that's stuck forever. But so back to you guys, you and Mustaine connecting, like you said, you met over cigarettes, you lived in an apartment together. So I was living with Maura on Vine and Yucca, like around there in Hollywood. I forgot the North Orange. I don't know. I think it was like near Vine and Yucca.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrible neighborhood. And you were living there? I thought you just came out for like a vacation. You actually lived there?
One-way ticket, man.
Okay, you were living there then.
I'm gonna jar your memory here, John.
Yeah, please. Yeah, no, this is fun.
Yeah, it's hysterical. So my life. I'm still alive. I'm gonna be 60 this year. So anyway, Maura, my friend, Maura O'Sullivan, who I went out to be with my heavy metal friend who was living with that guy, weirdo, Steve Lust. Do you remember Steve Lust? Steve Lust.
I don't.
He had the Trans Am with the little balls, those pom-pom balls. Dude.
This is in Hollywood?
Yes. And Maura burned her leg on his exhaust pipe. Anyway. And her friend Vicky, who she met, Vicky Mealy.
I remember Vicky, yeah.
Vicky says, we have to go to my boyfriend's house. We're like, okay. So we're like the two Jersey girls walking with Vicky, the Long Island girl, to her in Hollywood, knock on the door, but who opens it but Dave Mustaine? Right. And he looks at me and he's like, Metal Maria, what are you doing here? Like, he knew me from the East Coast, from, Megaforce that wasn't Megaforce yet, kind of. It was all heaven and blah, blah, crazed management, maybe even. But so, and then you lived with him. You guys lived together. Maybe it was different floors.
It was, yeah. Me and Greg lived downstairs. Dave was upstairs. Yeah.
But remember Dave Mustaine. All right. I don't want to say something because it was vile and disgusting. When he opened the door after you said, Maria, what are you doing? He goes, you're the girl that did. He said something really bad, like gross. I don't even.
Was it true?
No, it wasn't true. I want to say it. It was
all right. We'll leave it ambiguous. How about that?
What the fuck are you talking about? Like, not even close. But anyway, he kind of took me a little under his wing, took me aside, and he said, you can't live with those people. They're bad. Talking about Maura and Steve. I grew up with Old Bridge. So I'm like, what do you mean? What's going on? And he was like, they're shooting crystal meth.
Wow.
I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But they had cockroaches in their apartment, and I was not from the city. That bothered me. Them hearing they were doing drugs, I was like, no. So you and Dave let me come live with you. Do you even remember that? I stayed with you for like...
I don't remember.
God. I was with you guys for like, how many weeks? Like 5 or 6 weeks. I recorded on a boombox. I had my red boombox out there.
Maybe you were upstairs in Dave's place or something, because Dave, I think Dave moved in with the woman Tracy. Like they were roommates. That was all. You know what I mean? They were. Yeah.
No, you guys like kind of saved my life.
Yeah. So I'd see this whole time, I thought you came out to see Dave after being let go from Metallica. So I had this whole story wrong. So Josh, I'm as blown away as you probably are right now.
These are great, man. These are great stories. I love it.
Yeah, I remember everything.
And Dave saved your life. That's one thing about Dave. He had street smarts. He knew SoCal. He knew when he saw bullshit, he knew what was up.
He was very protective of me, and I really appreciate it.
He was to me too. He would always kind of pull me back, like, dude, that chick's trouble. Dude, that's trouble. Get away from those guys. He was good about that.
Why didn't he pull himself away from you then? Like, David, I'm trouble. You probably should stay away from me.
It was double trouble. I don't know. It was right. Yeah.
Oh, you guys were, but do you remember that I had spiky hair?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, you let me cut your hair once.
This is all news to me. Oh my God. See that you talked about earlier, right before we got on, you were talking about writing a memoir, which I think for sure you should. Yeah. Because that they, if you, me, and Josh were in a room, we'd have 3 sides to the story. Between the 3 of us, we put the story together, So
now imagine all of the motherfuckers that I know and all of the years of all of the memories, and a lot of them, some of them are not good. Some of them are rough.
Okay, so let's fast forward. So the whole new narrative has just been born here. So thank you for filling in the blank. So what happened? So I assume you moved back home. There's Joe, the Old Bridge Militia. Now Metallica Kill 'Em All has now been recorded through the summer while you were out in LA. It comes out. I remember going to see the show at the Country Club when they came through, which is where we saw a lot of stuff going on. So you're back home now in Jersey, and then did you go to work at Megaforce Records with John Marsha?
I started there. I was at Rock and Roll Heaven, but when I graduated high school, I left. Megaforce Records didn't really start. It didn't kick up yet. It was like a process of plannings. They were like, all right, this is what we have to do, because at the time Johnny would say none of the record companies were open to signing Metallica. They would hide under the desk, like, get this off. What is this horrible? So he had to form Megaforce. So while he was going through that process, still in Hollywood, I'm going to say this part of my story, still working Vine and Yucca, that area, selling glow-in-the-dark keychains. That was my job. I was a telemarketer.
We all did telemarketing in Hollywood. Dave got me and Greg Hanover a job at telemarketing. It was like,
you guys probably
hated it.
And I was glow in the dark keychains, calling businesses to sell it over the phone. And one morning, it was early, like the sun barely was up when I would have to go to that job, and I would walk I didn't have a driver's license or anything. I was a kid. And this dude pushing a cart like a bum, like a street person, came beside me and was like, "Hey, babe, hop in. You want to ride?" And scared. I got scared, so I called my father to please get me a ticket home.
Yeah.
And well, he said, "Well, I wish you would have let me buy you a round trip. It would have been cheaper." So I went back home. I, went back to my friends, John and Marcia, who by then needed my help.
Yeah.
What's my help? I was 17. Okay, I'll answer the phone. Okay, I'll open the mail. Okay, I'll make it. Like it was nothing. They didn't know what they were doing. I barely graduated high school. I went to reform schools and shit like real bad. And so yeah, like Metallica would come back and forth to do the tours. They did a big tour that Raven Kill 'Em All for one with Motorhead. Raven, that was I still have the t-shirt. And again, they just raised the bar for metal. And then Megadeth, what you guys did was elevated. Metallica, as dirty and fucking raw and fun as they were, you guys refined metal. You guys were a fast track, a fucking button press fast track to elevated, like almost like that Swedish sound before the Swedish sound even existed. Like that elegant, classical, holy, fucking powerful, Jesus on the cross fucking metal. And Megadeth were bigger and better than Metallica for a very long fucking period of motherfucking time. And I'm saying it like that because I really want to drive that into everybody's heads. I really want people to know, like, if we're going to look at record sales, merch sales, during certain periods of time, Megadeth was smoking Metallica hard and writing, really, in my opinion, better music. Like, to me, if we're going to talk about Metallica, Kill 'Em All was a great record, good record. I like Whip, but
right.
Lightning was a graduation. It was like, oh my God, look what they just did. And from there, well, where do you go? Right. Okay.
Right.
But Megadeth, you guys consistently reinvented and took listeners into different levels. And again, I don't want to use the word prog metal because it's like,
no, but it did. It trended over there unintentionally, not in traditional. Yeah. No, I understand.
But it was progressive, where everybody kind of stayed the same. Excuse me. You guys always were very progressive. That's my take.
Gee, I'm blushing. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah. If Josh is smiling, then we're good. So that's
no, I'm loving it. I'm loving the the adamancy that Maria has. And Maria, it's great to see you. It's 20 minutes into the conversation. That's about when I chime in on these things because David is a yapper. Obviously good to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple of years. A couple of years ago, Louder Than Life, hanging out with you and my wife and Jamie Roberts and everybody else, having a good time there. I just want to say thank you for, you hooked me up with an interview with Johnny Z years ago when he was promoting his book. Obviously he's passed away now. So those are kind of the special ones, that, I've had Mike Howe on and Johnny Z and like all those guys that are no longer with us. Kind of go back to the origins of meeting Johnny and Marcia and, what they obviously ended up meaning to you later in life.
Yeah. So again, it was like heavy metal. I was a young girl in Old Bridge, hung out mostly with 1 or 2 years older than me, 1 to 4 years older than me, actually, and mostly guys, and they all listened to metal. I wasn't hanging with the jocks, And so, we graduated from Leonard Skinner and Led Zeppelin to Judas Priest and AC/DC, and, from there, what's next? Motorhead, yay, Metallica, cool, and all these other things. But, my friend Gary lived next door to John and Marcia, and he was like, oh, my neighbors sell records at a flea market in East Brunswick, was a drive away, but go knock on their door. Maybe they'll sell you a record. So they did vinyl somewhere here. It's the Motorhead on clear vinyl. Nice. Knocked on the door, and, they had a baby. She was 9 months old, Ricky Zazula. And I was the youngest of 5 girls. So I needed a baby sister. I really did want a baby sister. And I just connected with John and Marcia to help them take care of their baby. So I have a little sister. And I think they just recognized in me like loyalty and someone who cares, someone who's reliable. And as they grew in developing their businesses, I was there. You know, we all stepped in shit, I say. You know, we were all in the right place at the right time, and shit just happened.
You know, we had Michael Lago on the show, and he talked about sort of that migration for Metallica in particular. And we kind of touched on that XY axis where, you know, where it was time to go to the, you know, to the big leagues. But Josh, you were going to say, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that was exactly where I was going with that. Was we had Michael Alago on the show, and, you know, kind of hearing his side of the story of Metallica going to Elektra. You know, how did that affect Johnny at the time?
Okay, so like, I know that I'm pretty sure I know the story that Michael tells because I worked his book.
Mm-hmm.
But so part of the history of what happened when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what actually happened, and this is from Johnny Z's mouth, and I was right there, like as it was all happening. Johnny took Metallica's demo to Tom Zutaut.
Mm-hmm.
Tom said, and I don't know if Johnny gave you this interview when he talked to you. He was whatever. Anyway, he went to Tom, and Tom said, "I'm leaving. I'm going to Geffen," because he was going to go sign like Guns N' Roses. But demo to the kid over there, and the kid was Michael Alago, and Michael Alago was not really a rock guy per se at the time, but that's who signed Metallica. Johnny took it to Michael, and Mike, that's what happened.
Hey, so let me ask you about like the rods. There was this whole scene that was going on, right? Because, you know, we have Megadeth obviously ended up on Combat, so there was, you know, Talus, Sabotage. You know, there's these labels. They sort of had their own little cachet, right? And John and Marcia had Raven, the Rods. Most of their records were made in upstate New York. But
Johnny and Marcia, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Please continue.
Okay. No. That was it. Take it from there.
So Johnny and Marcia kind of stumbled into heavy metal. They weren't really metal fans at first. They were big Deadheads, and from the disco era, Marcia especially would like to, you know, go dancing and stuff. They came from that out of the 70s, going into the 80s and stuff. They were getting records for the flea market store, Rock and Roll Heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Mistakenly, Important Records, their distributor, gave them heavy metal records. We say mistakenly, but Johnny and Marcia felt they were just using them to like get rid of some of these records that we don't know what to do with.
Right.
I don't remember what the title was or what the artist was. It was like Gary Moore or something like that ish. But they mistakenly got these metal records and started selling them and listening to them. And Johnny and Marcia, they had open mind for music, and especially Johnny, he like Captain Beefheart and all these like weird metal bands, and stuff. So they started kind of delving into and diving into heavy metal, and you know, whether it was like Y&T or Tigers of Pantang, and you know, the imports through Important Records. So he then made a partnership with Sace Wessels, the head of Runner Records.
He was Road Racer Records at that time, because me and Dave actually took an appointment with him to talk to him. Yeah, we talked to Brian Slagle. Johnny Z, of course, threw a line in the water, you know, a light line for Megadeth, right? But then we met with Case Wessels, who built the Roadrunner empire, but it was Road Racer back then.
Wow. I didn't even.
And we didn't sign with him because we figured if he's in Denmark, I think it's like, how are we going to get paid? You know, how do you audit the guy from Denmark? You know what I mean? So we ended up going with Combat, who, by the way, were distributed by Important as well. Cliff, what was his name?
Cliff
Culturelli was a wonderful man down in the kind of Hermosa Beach area. You know, remember he had that Steve Vai flexible disc. Did you ever hear that, Josh? This was like this kind of coming out of, it's kind of his first solo EP coming out of Frank Zappa. It's called Flexible. It's incredible. If it's available online for any of the viewers, definitely check it out. It's mind-blowing how good it is. And, but yeah, I remember Importance. They were, you know, and it's funny because I was just talking to a friend even the Megadeth Killing Is My Business came out about this time in 1985, this time of year. And, Music for Nations was a player over there. I think the Metallica, didn't John and Marcia, they did deals with Music for Nations, right, in the UK.
Yeah.
What was the Metallica records out, right?
Martin Hooker.
Yeah, Martin Hooker. Yeah, exactly. And I remember they were always, because I kind of watched what John was doing, because he was a little ahead of the curve. And of course, Barry Coburn, who owned Combat Records at the time.
Wow.
We didn't, we had a very, unlike a relationship with John and Marcia as an artist was very different, right? It was very hands-on, a lot of heart and soul. You've got Metal Maria hanging around, right? You've got that, we with Barry Coburn over at Combat and Steve Sinclair was not a friendly relationship that we had with them, mostly because there was only a limited amount of money. There was no more, we had Mike Schnapp. He was our Metal Maria, and we all needed someone who, you could smoke a doob, talk metal, complain about your label, bitch about everything, then go get on stage and go play. That was just like you.
Yeah. I mean, it was just that way, like where John and Marcia kind of stumbled into having Megaforce through, like I said, no one wanted to sign Metallica. So they're like, all right, I guess we'll start Megaforce. They had the through important records and distributors, started setting up distribution deals. They traded basically a licensing deal with Sace Wessels from Roadrunner Records. Yeah. Holland, actually, not Denmark.
It was Holland. You're right. It was Holland. Yeah.
And we took Merciful Fate and he took Metallica. So that was just
was the swap. No shit. No.
It's a record. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but we all kind of like together in our own, wherever we were, took one step at a time, like Metal Mike, right, in Holland, helping the scene. Gott Tournament in Germany, helping the scene. Bufo Schnadelbach, helping the scene. Like all of these players and, writers, Stefan Shirazi, Del J.
And even Malcolm Dome, I remember when Malcolm came over to hear the mixes and do photos for the Killing Is My Business when we were at Crystal Sound Labs mixing the Killing Is My Business record. And you'd go out and you get pissed as an Englishman, right? Because you just get fucking hammered, get drunk with all these guys. And, you think you're becoming friends with them and then they write whatever the fuck they want. And if they were English press, they could be, in their humor and their ways, as we know, right? They could be pretty sharp at times with the things that they said about you,
You guys were celebrated and heralded, really, like maybe as
for sure.
You might have picked, one or two words in articles that might have been like, oh, and you focus on that. But for the most part, I mean, you are the big four.
Well, 30 years later, I guess they like it a lot better. But
yeah.
So Maria,
go ahead, Josh.
Kind of looking back on it too. I mean, another band that was always hanging around Johnny was Anthrax. Those Anthrax guys kind of go into rock and roll heaven and, chasing Johnny down at an IHOP because they know he likes to get breakfast there and all this stuff. Like, what are your kind of memories on the Anthrax guys kind of popping around?
They were like pains in the ass to Johnny. I was a kid. I wasn't as attached, but Johnny would be like, oh, these guys, they just keep bothering me. They really were up his ass. But when he finally gave them the time at the right time, originally, I don't think it was ready. When they did the Ross the Boss single, I think he recognized something good could come. And boy, it really worked out. Not only did he put out their first single, but managed them, right? And then that magical night at the Roseland Ballroom when we had Metallica, Raven, and Anthrax performing in 1984, when he signed Metallica to Elektra, Raven to Atlantic, and Anthrax to Island, and the rest is fucking history. Jesus. And nothing like this. I mean, trajectory, like just rocket ship, man, to the fucking moon.
I mean, it's funny. You guys were like, Megaforce was like the thrash metal Motown. It's like you guys had this whole in-house, very, very well, right? Very well thought out. Like you said, the answer may not be yes. It's not no, like with Anthrax, it's maybe. And then once they delivered, there it was, right? So, and if you do the Motown tour, you realize that with Berry Gordy. What do they say? You come in ordinary and you leave a star, right? Like when you come through that machinery, and it's the same way. If you know, the Rods, Raven, Metallica, Anthrax, if you went through the Johnny Z machinery, when you came out the other side, you were catapulted up. And the funny thing is, the goal was to start with an indie like Megaforce, Metal Blade, Combat, etc., and then graduate up to the major label. I mean, you know, Combat, we had Gary Holt on here, and he talked about, you know, basically Combat was the house Megadeth built, you know, Roadrunner became the house Nickelback and Slipknot built, right? Megaforce was the house that, Raven, Metallica, and Anthrax built, right?
And Atlantic Records, the deal we got, the distribution deal, like after Metallica. So after that night I was bragging about before, and I have pics hanging out with Richie Stotts that night from Plasmatics. It was rad.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And but after that night, like the very next day, Lars took it upon himself to go to Q Prime and basically get out of the contract of management with Johnny and Marsha. We had Crazed management as well. Mm-hmm. Again, more legacy there. You know, on Crazed, we had Raven, Metallica, Anthrax, Ministry. We took on it at one point, 1990 to 1996, their fucking heyday. Right. We had Suicidal Tendencies for Lights, Action Revolution. So all of the different artists and all of the different like teams that I've worked with over the years, a lot from that. You know, I'm not perfect and I have a lot more to learn. I'm still fucking Metal Maria. I still am. I'm not really, but I love the different experiences that I've been able to have with all of the different people from, you know, my humble beginnings, like eating a granola bar one day a week, like every day, because that's all I could afford when I was living with you guys. You guys busted me eating fucking salad dressing once. You don't remember that? I was.
How dare you eat salad dressing? You think that would be a good thing?
No, it was gross because it was just salad dressing. That's how it worked. David Ellefson, that's how poor we were. You guys barely fucking ate.
Oh, like, God, we hardly ate anything. We'd buy those big tubes of ground beef from Ralph's, from Rock and Roll Ralph's, because you could make freaking, you know, like Hamburger Helper for like a month on that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Pink's hot dogs or whatever. I remember you guys there. None of us.
That was a luxury.
We were starving children back in the day.
Yeah.
But it helped build character, I think. I work really hard still, and I'll be fucking 60 this year. Yeah.
Welcome to the club. you know, it's interesting, Maria, you talk about that with Lars, and I always had this great admiration for him. It's almost like he turned over to the back of Def Leppard High and Dry and just went right down the list. I want Q Prime. I want Marsha Vlasic as my agent. I want Siegel Feldstein as my business manager. It's like he held himself in that school of that echelon, that top tier echelon. And when he wanted it, he just went out and got it, and he made it happen. And it's incredible to do that, because right.
Success in anything. So I left the music business for a year and a half, went to cooking school, and became a chef. And when I graduated, they said, "Where do you want to do an internship?" And I said, and I was in New York at the time. I said either Chez Panisse in Berkeley or the Laundry in Yountville, Napa Valley. And the guy laughed at me at my school. He laughed. He goes, "Oh, tell me, where do you really want to go?" I said, French Laundry or Chez Panisse, and you're either going to get it for me or I'm going to get it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From that,
no more salad dressing, motherfucker.
No. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, another great Johnny Z story. I think he told, obviously I was asking him about this man here, Cliff Burton. I think he said that they couldn't find Cliff one night. They didn't know where he was, and they go up to the baby's room, and Cliff's up there reading a bedtime story to the baby. Just like what are your kind of outside of Metallica memories of Cliff?
I would always meet up and smoke J's with him, and it was just always calm and relaxed. We would go to shows together, and he would be like protecting me. Like I have pictures, and you could see it in the body language in the pictures, like. Him with his denim jacket. I'm like this little thing, and he's just like, arm around me, protecting me, just protection like a brother. So that was really it. Like he was one of us, but he knew he was a little bit older, and he was a gentleman,
Hey, Maria, I think you called Dave at our apartment. You called Dave to let him know that Cliff had passed, right? I think, right? Because I remember when that phone call came, and by now we were assigned to Capitol. We had our band department that we called the Ranch over in Silver Lake.
Yeah.
And you called. It was early in the morning. And, I remember after that, Dave picked up his guitar and wrote the song "In My Darkest Hour," pretty much most of the music in its entirety. And I remember that call. It was a heavy, heavy day. I mean, that is the day the world stopped in our world, as you called it. And I want to go back to this before we end here too, because when we started, before we got on the recording, you were talking about how we're a family. And in fact, maybe you can even speak to that. Speak about that Cliff moment, just the heartbreak of that.
Yeah, it was a reality check, and everything did stop. Like it's even hard to talk about. Like, I remember getting that phone call in my house in Old Bridge. We had a phone on the wall. My father had a lock on the phone because I would call. Mostly because probably calling you guys in California. But anyway, I remember that big phone on the wall and John and Marcia calling. Anthrax was on tour with Metallica, and Marcia was like, "Maria, sit down." And I was like, "What's going on? Like, what the fuck could possibly going on?" Meanwhile, they flew to San Francisco to meet with Testament to sign them because I was bugging John and Marcia about this band that I fell in love with from a demo, Testament. So they flew out to California, but because they were managing Anthrax, they got the call right away that there was a bus accident, Cliff died, and they told me, and I just, everything stopped. It was just like, where do you go from here? You're just stopped. And I remember the very first person that I did call was Dave Mustaine, because, they were in a band together. And even though I know it was a hard, devastating breakup for Dave mostly, I felt like he needs to be shown the respect, to be told to not like read about it in like a newspaper, or like, having someone maybe not close to him who cares about him to tell him. So I remember calling him and telling him that.
I remember very clearly him on the phone with you in our apartment. He was standing there in our kitchen area talking to you, and it was just heavy. It was like, turn the fucking TV off, turn the stereo off. What the fuck just happened? And I asked Dave over the years, I'd ask him about Cliff, like, how was the songwriting contribution? What was this? What was that? And he said, he goes, Cliff was older than those guys, and so when he spoke, they listened. You know what I mean? Like, they'd all be rowdy and doing whatever they're doing, and drinking and partying and rocking and whatever. But it came when he spoke, it seemed like he spoke with authority. You know what I mean? He didn't speak often, but when he did, it mattered, and it really, it had an impact. And it was interesting. Dave and I, honestly enough, Michael Lago was courting me and Dave. We had the Peace Cells album, literally in our hands. We had recorded it for Combat Records. We went to New York to get a new manager on board, Keith Rawls, and Michael was courting us to sign to Elektra. We went over to Rutherford to see Metallica, who were on tour with Ozzy at that time, and went backstage and hung out and talked and had a nice chat with Cliff. I was asking him about some of his writing on Master Puppets. Yeah, and he said he said, that's the thing. Metallica guys were very gracious for all that happened between them and Dave. Lars always remained friends with Dave. He would come to our shows. You could tell he was a fan of Dave. He's a fan of his music. He's a fan of, as much as it didn't work for them to be in a band together, you can tell he still had great admiration for Dave's abilities, and his writing style. So, they would welcome us in, and, we walk in with Michael and I remember having that conversation with Cliff, and he said, he goes, I didn't write as much on this one as I did on Ride the Lightning, but Orion obviously huge. That was,
I'm just bursting the bubble here. So here comes Maria.
Yeah, come on in. All right. So
he was definitely mature, and they were fucking ratty punks. Not Kirk, no. Lars and James ran that band, and still do, and that's cool, but he definitely was mature, and definitely they respected him. But at the beginning, middle, and end of day, they mostly Lars had control and kept control. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Do you remember the show Testament, Megadeth Slayer in the Bay Area? And I took a photo backstage in a dressing room of you, Mustaine, James, and Lars. Do you remember that photo or that moment?
What year was this? When was this?
I'm going to say 2000 and between 2007 and 9 or something.
So maybe it was we'd already done the Big Four, because I remember James and Lars came down to we played the Cow Palace with Slayer. That seems to be when we had already started doing the Big Four. James had he had his Tank T-shirt on. I remember that, and they came down to see us, and they actually stood side stage. I think that was the one. It was at the Cow Palace. Slayer.
They were running around stage, Lars and James, and I go, guys, come with me. So they followed me, and we went right into your dressing room.
I think that was it. I think it was in 2010. And then I remember, here's what I remember, because we all walked to the stage together. By now, we were brothers in arms, as like with Dave and everything, and James and Lars. So we're walking to the stage, and Dave asked. He asked Lars, he goes, is there something you want to hear? As we're walking to the stage, right? And Lars, being a big fan of the Peace Sells album, he goes, how about My Last Words? So literally as we're walking, it's like, hey, Sean, Junior, Broderick, My Last Words is going to be in the set, right after whatever, you know what I mean? And I know it, of course, because it played it, over the years. So, Chris Broderick, who's kind of nervous like that anyways, like, oh my, you could tell he's just practicing on the side of the stage. And Sean Drover's a fan, so he knew it, But I remember James and Lars, they stood side stage over by me and Dave, because that's what the vibe was on the Big Four. And we'd already done a handful of those shows in Europe. I think we'd already done Sofia. We'd already recorded, that filmed it. So there was a great vibe between us. It was super chill. And you're right. I think that was the one, because it was at the Cow Palace. I'm pretty sure that would have been the one. Yeah.
I was battling Maria that night.
Yeah. As you do in your ultimate fandom, but also with your professional acumen that you have,
good intentions. Let me get the boys together.
Yes. Yeah. No, I remember taking the photo. It was great. That was really, and the vibes were so good then. There was real peace amongst brothers. You know what I mean? And, I was back in Megadeth. Lombardo's back in Slayer. Belladonna's back in Anthrax. It was really it was a great moment,
God, I really like John Bush better in Anthrax.
Well, look, John Bush is John Bush, man. That guy's, we do Metal Allegiance with him, and that guy gets on stage and the fucking room changes, man. There's
Christ, the sound of white noise, that record fucking.
I like playing those songs. We play those with Metal Allegiance. I remember how nervous he was when, because Charlie would play with us in Metal Allegiance, and, Mike Monterulo would be their manager. And it was always, Mike's a sweet guy. And it was always just like, John was really nervous. It's like, come on, these guys they're not going to fucking care. That was 20 years ago. You know what I mean? But it was nervous, so, and then they got on the other side of it, and it's fine. Now it's just in the set list,
Cool.
Maria, I wanted to dive in here and kind of talk about the PR side of things, and kind of, your relationship with PR over the last 40 or so years of like, we got to get them in the Metal magazine all the way up to now, where it's like, you got to deal with Blabbermouth, you got to deal with the PRP, and Metal Sucks and
exist.
Yeah. So it's wild to see, like what are your,
I'll say it. I said it before today, before we started recording. We have a metal community, and our community is a family. And whether it's bad shit or good shit, we're all here together, and we're all getting through it. And those magazines and those writers and those editors and those photographers, 98% of them are you and me. They're metal people that love this, that want to support it. So I'm sorry, what was your question? How has publicity changed in 40 plus years? Yeah, the obvious. There's less magazines, but again, we still have the camaraderie, the people who are still doing it, Blabbermouth, Revolver, Guitar World, Metal Sucks, Metal Injection, new noise, not fest. There's new things that come up all the time, and supporting the little guys that come up. I think it's important. You know, I work with a lot of bands and like, oh, I only want to talk to the big magazines. Well, guess the fuck what? Rolling Stone does not want your like, let's be real. But like, do an interview with this, you know, one outlet, just even as an exercise to keep yourself busy, to talk about what you're doing and learn even more about yourself and grow. And you never know. That person might grow to be an editor somewhere else one day. That article might get picked up one day, or it might even be the last fucking interview you do because you fucking died of a heart attack 2 seconds after you hang up the phone. So it's the most important thing you ever fucking did. Like, everybody get your head out of your ass. That's where publicity has gone. Trying to keep your head out of your ass.
You know, it's funny you talk about the, you know, hey, go do the interview with the guy and maybe he'll become something later on. And, you know, you've given me a ton of interviews over the years, you know, you and Annie, and even when Natalie was there, and like everybody over the Adrenaline's always been great to the, you know, Talk To Me podcast, even, you know, when I went to Knotfest and everything else. But it's also the way I look at it too, is like, how many interviews have I done with like, will you please interview this band? You know, give them a shot, blah, blah, blah. And I've done it. And then you watch them grow. And that's my favorite part, almost the father in me, kind of watching a band go from, you know, opening the side stage to headlining the main stage and all that stuff in between. That's been the most fun of the podcast journey.
Yeah. And I mean, Brian Stillman, he was this like fan writer for some goth magazine in like 1995 or whatever. And he's like, I really want to interview Ministry. And I'm like, what's your circulation? He goes, I think 500. I said, all right, if anybody asks you, it's 5,000. Go to the interview. He became the editor of Revolver at one point.
Yeah. So everybody deserves that start. So, you know,
we did. You know, Junior,
yeah.
You had a start.
And you know what? I did a lot when the whole, you know, kind of online magazine. I remember doing an interview with Blabbermouth right as Megadeth ended in 2002. I did an interview with them. I had no idea who they were. It was, you know, probably through some AOL email address or something, right? This is a long time ago. So I'm like, yeah, why not? Because, you know, Megadeth was an early adapter with Megadeth.com and all of our web presence, right? So I was always say yes, be on board with that, and I did. And of course, you know, some of them talk shit, what you know, whatever, and comments open and all this kind of bullshit. But, you know, the reality of it is I did pretty much all of them through my career. Like, you know, little, you know, we always call it joesmetal.net, whatever, you know, from you know, who cares, you know, do them because they all end up pushing up into the big, you know, into the big sites. And those little guys, you know, the Metal Injections and Metal Sucks and Blabber, and, you know, these guys, I remember these guys when they were just tiny little websites, and now they've become major news sources, you know. So
Metallica was a little itty bitty band too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We were all little itty bitty something at one point, you know. So,
actually, one of my first big interviews on Talk To Me within the first year of the show was David Ellefson. And look at you now, you're doing a show with me. So,
hey, the first record I bought from Johnny and Marcia was a Motorhead record on Motorhead's. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Well, Maria, hey, thank you so much for being on the show. We don't want to take up the rest of our year talking about this, even though we could, because it's so much fun and it's fucking awesome. So thank you for just filling in so many blanks and just kind of reliving the memories. And yeah, and like Josh said, you know, you've been really great. You've not only raised up a lot of great artists, you've raised up a lot of good publicists. Some of your employees have gone on. Natalie went on to Napalm. There's people that have gone on to other things. Yeah. So you've done great raising up, you know, the men and women in your industry on your side of it as well. So thank you so much. We'll see you somewhere here this summer, you know, as we roll around the planet and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Maria. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Maria.
See ya. Bye.